Then the final thing in regards to this is tawasi bil haqq happens, just the use of the word tawasi, it comes from tafa'ul, which implies cooperation. So this happens within your community. This is talking about something that this conversation is happening within your community, within your family, within the circle of Muslims, within those who claim to have iman, wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah, and do righteous deeds. So this tawasi bil haqq begins here, and then goes beyond that. So when we talk about encouraging, sharing the truth with non-Muslims or our non-Muslim neighbors and the society at large, all of that is true. But where does it begin? It begins within our own household, and that's the hardest place to begin. But this is really the place where we have to begin this tawasi bil haqq. You have to look at the injustices and the wrongs and the violations of the basic principles of iman that may be happening in your own family, and you have to speak out against them. It is much easier for me to sit behind a table and a mic and a camera and speak about these things to strangers. Much harder to speak these things in front of family. It's much, much, much harder. It takes a lot more courage, it takes a lot more patience. Which leads me to the next point. When you do this work, it will require and necessitate patience. So Allah Azza wa Jal concludes the surah by saying, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ. Sabr, the word sabr means several things. And in English, it's kind of unfair to translate it as patience. So first, let's comment on what the several meanings of sabr are. It certainly includes patience, but it includes perseverance. Perseverance implies when things become difficult, you still hang on. You still keep going, chugging along. This is persevering. It also implies commitment. In other words, you never get lazy, you never slack off. You remain committed, like you're committed to getting to work on time every day. Or you're committed to handing the assignment in before it's due. Commitment. It also implies constancy. In other words, your commitment doesn't fluctuate, it doesn't go up and down. It's the same. Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, in defining sabr, he said, it is to have the same level of obedience to Allah in ease or in difficulty. If you can have the same level of obedience to Allah, whether times are easy or they are difficult, then you have exercised the quality of as-sabr. That's what sabr is. So now, but Allah doesn't say, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالْحَقِّ وَصَبَرُوا. This is very important. They encouraged each other and counseled each other to the best of their ability, with sincerity, truthfully, to the truth and to the obligations that they owe. And Allah didn't continue by saying, and they were patient in doing so. He didn't just say they were patient. He went a step further and said, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, which teaches us something huge. Not only is sabr included now, meaning they were patient, they were perseverant, they remained constant, but they encouraged each other in remaining patient and constant and persevering. You know what that teaches us? You cannot keep your sabr. You need someone to counsel you and give you strength and say, listen, you need to have sabr. We need to feed, sabr feeds off of each other. The strength comes from the other. You will lose heart on your own. It is a natural tendency of human beings when they're engaged in a frustrating situation. The most active of the Muslims, the most righteous of the Muslims, they're doing good things, and then somebody insults them, or somebody doesn't appreciate what they do, and bad things happen even in Islamic work, and they lose heart. The good people who know this better than I do, even then you have to go to that scholar, go to that imam, go to that activist, that da'i, that teacher, whoever he may be, and you have to go tell them, listen, you have to have sabr. And when you go and remind them in this way, does it benefit them? It does. Even though they already know this. Even though they already know about sabr. They still benefit from this kind of tawasi. So tawasi bis sabr is something that happens mutually. And this is something that happens, that is necessary for these things to have been met. And if we're not engaged, tawasi bil haqq may be to the adverse. And tawasi bil sabr is to those who are now trying to do tawasi bil haqq but losing heart. They're not seeing results. Among each other, how do they keep their strength going? By counseling each other with perseverance. Sabr, the way it's described in the most simple terms is ala al-masa'ib, meaning you have to be patient, perseverant, remain constant no matter how difficult things get. Wasbir ala ma asabak. Persevere no matter what calamity falls upon you. That's one meaning. The other is, anil ma'asi, meaning you will be tempted. Those who do work for this deen in any capacity, whether you're trying to serve this deen inside your house, outside, you're trying to do da'wah to non-Muslims, set up a charity, whatever you're trying to do for Islam, guess who shaitan's after? The people who are trying to serve this deen. So that he will tempt them with disobedience to Allah in their private moments more than anyone else. They are more susceptible. They are more under attack. So you have to have sabr from falling into disobedience to Allah. And then you have to have sabr on the obedience to Allah, meaning obedience to Allah can become difficult. And you have to remain perseverant. And you have to, there are among us, these are real stories. This is not some theory. Allah speaks to us, He talks about us, and He knows what kind of lives we lead. فِيهِ ذِكْرُكُمْ. And it is your own mention. There are brothers and sisters even who are very active in some Islamic activity. They're doing a lot of good things. But then they have some really bad habits. Really evil habits. And it's a problem. They're addicted to them. They need, what they need? They need tawasi bis sabr. They need somebody else constantly counseling them and saying, listen, you need to persevere. You need to hold on. The final few things I want to share with you in regards to the sequence of these 4 items. The first comment is all of these are mentioned in the past tense. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, past tense. وَعَمِلُوا, past tense. وَتَوَاصَوْا, all past tense. What's the benefit of that? What's the difference between saying that and saying إِلَّا الَّذِينَ يُؤْمِنُونَ وَيَعْمَلُونَ الصَّالِحَاتِ وَيَتَوَاصَوْنَ بِالْحَقِّ وَيَتَوَاصَوْنَ بِالصَّبْرِ? Why not mention it in the present tense? Mentioning it in the past tense implies these are people who lived their entire life doing it and until the moment they died. So you can look back at their entire life and you'll be able to say, yes, they fulfilled the rights of iman. Yes, when you look at their life, you say these people did good. And they did tawasi bil haqq and they did tawasi bil sabr. In other words, this is almost a fulfillment of the ayah, وَلَا تَمُوتُنَّ إِلَّا وَأَنْتُمْ مُسْلِمُونَ. Don't you dare die except that you're Muslims. When you're looking back at their life, you don't say they used to be good and then they failed, tapered off. Until the end of their life, they were committed, so you can look back at them and say, they fulfilled all 4 of these things. So by mentioning them in the past, it is an illustration that their entire life represents these behaviors, until death came to them. These are the people. In other words, you can never just stop. You can never just look, you have to reach the point where you can look back, or people will look back at your entire life and be able to say, all these 4 conditions were met. This is the second benefit. And the final thing, and probably one of the most important things in regards to this discussion on Surah Al-Asr, is the following. You know how the ba had several benefits? With haqq, we talked about that. Similarly, when they do tawasi bis sabr, when they're encouraging each other, they're doing it with patience. They're doing it with patience. And when they're encouraging each other, they're doing it to patience. So what's the difference between saying, I'm advising you with patience, and I'm advising you to patience? And so this is 2 separate things. To patience and perseverance. The way in which I give you this counsel also requires patience. I have to be patient in giving this counsel to you. You can't just have sabr, brother, You have to be very patient and you have to be very forbearing in dealing with people that are suffering from, or lack of obedience to Allah. You have to have counsel for them, right? You have to be patient with them in doing this kind of counsel to them. But also, what are you encouraging them to develop? Patience itself, themselves. So the way you deliver it requires patience, and what you're calling them to itself is as-sabr, this constancy, this perseverance. Actually, there's one last thing that came in my head, and I should just mention it. These 4 things are a litmus test of each other. That's the last thing we'll say. These 4 things are a litmus test of each other. In other words, if somebody loses sabr, if somebody loses sabr, then they won't really be able to do tawasi bil haqq. Why not? Because as soon as they try to tell people the truth, people will say things they don't want to hear. And when people say things they don't want to hear, things get difficult. They will say, I don't want to deal with this. When you say, I don't want to deal with it, I'm walking away, I can't handle it, what is that a lack of? That's a lack of sabr. So the fact that someone doesn't encourage to the truth actually already illustrates there's a lack of sabr. There's a lack of sabr. And the other thing that this illustrates is, somebody might think they're calling to the truth, but nobody has a problem with what they're saying. They think they're calling to the truth, but nobody's offended by what they have to say. Nobody gets up and gives them a hard time about it. You know what that means? That the fact that your apparent tawasi bil haqq didn't require sabr, you know what that means? You probably aren't doing tawasi bil haqq. Because the softest, most gentlest of people on the face of this earth, when they called to the truth, they got in trouble. They got in trouble. It is a necessary consequence of doing this job. Whether, and the most patient of the Rusul of Allah, right? Alayhi salatu wasalam. Look at Nuh alayhi salam. It is a lifetime of da'wah, but it's also a lifetime of what? Sabr. Right? Because it required, what he did, what he called for, led people to, to insult him, to humiliate him, to be against him, and that necessitates sabr. And the lack of both of these things, when you're not calling to the truth, then there's no need for you to show or illustrate sabr. All this last component, if somebody doesn't do it, what is that a proof? What's missing? When they don't call to the truth, and of course then there's no need for sabr anyway, what is that a sign of? There's a lack of what? The first two conditions, eman and righteous deeds. Because until you yourself do righteous deeds, you will not see the ugliness of evil deeds. If you're not doing righteous deeds yourself, you don't see what the big deal is in doing bad things. But when you start becoming, you will know this for sure. Maybe you were a party animal before and you made tawbah and you started obeying Allah. When you start obeying Allah, you see somebody else partying, it bothers you. It hurts. It didn't hurt before, but now it hurts. How can they do that? I have to stop them. I made this mistake. I don't want them to make that mistake. It hurts you now. So the fact that it doesn't hurt, so you never feel the need to say, actually illustrates that you are not committed to good deeds. And if you're not committed to good deeds, it means you don't really have what? Iman. So all of these things are lazim wa malzoom. They are necessary consequences of each other and coherently connected with each other. I took a lot of extra time explaining this one surah. When we started from Surah Al-Naba, it was one session each. But this is the fourth session on Surah Al-Asr. And finally, alhamdulillah, we've come to the conclusion. Why? Simply because I feel this is the shortest surah. This is the surah that is easiest to memorize. Most of us know it by heart. But this is also the heaviest surah. This is the heaviest surah. It will change the way you look at your life. It will change the way you you think about your family, think about your daily activities, what you've accomplished, what you haven't accomplished. Most importantly, it will change the way you think about success and failure. It will change your attitude towards all of these things. You know how Dr. Fadl Salih Hassan al-Ra'i argues that the beginning of a surah is always rhetorically connected to its ending. The beginning of a surah is always tied to its ending. What's the beginning of the surah? One ayah, wal asr. The point of which is to illustrate that your time is running out. And the last ayah has 4 activities that we've been discussing over the last 2 sessions. You know how you tie these 2 things together? Your time to get serious about iman and action and tawasi bil haqq and tawasi bil sabr is what? Is running out. You better get your act together. This is a state of emergency for you personally. Innal insana lafi khusr, you understand this as inna nafsi, I myself am in trouble. I am in loss. May Allah Azza wa Jal make us of those who successfully fulfill the conditions of Surah Al-Asr. Allahumma ja'alna min alladhina amanu wa amilu salihat wa tawasaw bil haqq wa tawasaw bil sabr. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ani wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.